The wind in Dry Creek had a way of howling like it remembered sins long buried. And that morning, just before sunrise, the townsfolk saw something they'd never forget. A lone rider in black, his coat soaked in snow, his horse breathing like smoke. He paused at the edge of town, looked toward the hills, and whispered a name no one else heard. Clara. But Clara wasn't awake to hear it. She was miles away, still asleep in a train car rumbling west, her head leaning against a frost-bitten window, dreaming of drowning. She'd changed her name, changed her story, and changed her future. But some names don't stay buried. Some stories refuse to die. Her real name wasn't Clara Rose. That was the name she gave the agency. The name she stitched on letters to a stranger named Elias Turner, a farmer seeking a wife, not a fugitive. Back east in Tennessee, she was someone else. Someone whose fiancé disappeared 3 nights before the wedding. Someone whose name still echoed in parlors and backroom gossip. Someone the law wanted to question. Someone she didn't want to be anymore. But west of the Mississippi, no one. Ask questions if you had soft eyes and steady hands. That's what Elias wrote in his final letter. I don't need a perfect woman. Just one who's not afraid of hard days and quiet nights. If that's you, then I'll be waiting at Dry Creek Station. My name's Elias Turner. I'll bring a red scarf, so you'll know me. Now, as the train screeched toward that small town wrapped in snow, Clara clutched that letter tight in her gloved hand, folded and creased 100 times over. She told herself she wasn't running anymore. She was starting over. But then, as the train slowed and the wooden sign for Dry Creek appeared from the mist, her eyes caught a silhouette on the platform. A man in brown, Elias, surely, yet just behind him, barely visible through the steam and snowfall. A second figure. Still, dressed in black. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. Not him. She blinked, heart racing. When she looked again, he was gone. The train hissed to a stop. Elias waved, holding the red scarf, smiling. But Clara's heartbeat didn't settle, because in her soul, something ancient stirred. A truth she'd buried miles deep. The past hadn't just caught up, it had ridden into town on a black horse. The wagon wheels creaked against the snow-packed road as Elias guided the horses toward his homestead. Clara sat beside him, her hands tucked under her shawl, her spine too straight, too alert, as if fear still rode shotgun. Elias glanced at her now and then. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice was like firewood, rough, dependable, and warm when needed. It ain't much, he finally said, nodding toward the horizon. Just a cabin, a barn, and 20 acres of frozen dirt. But it's honest. Clara forced a small smile. I'm not looking for luxury, just quiet. Elias nodded, and they rode on in silence. But the quiet wasn't kind. It gave her too much space to remember, too much room for her thoughts to pull back the curtain of the past. She remembered the candlelight flickering over that hotel room's wallpaper. She remembered the knock on the door, and the man who walked in, dragging her fiancé's bloodied pocket watch by its chain. He made a deal he couldn't keep, the man in black had said, voice cold as iron. She never told anyone what happened after. She just vanished. Now, as Elias helped her down from the wagon, Clara's boots crunched softly into the snow in front of his cabin. It was small but clean, with smoke curling from the chimney and icicles hanging from the eaves like frozen prayers. He opened the door and stepped aside. Ladies first. Inside was warm, simple, a rocking chair by the hearth, a table with 2 mugs set out, a faded quilt draped over the sofa. He'd made a home for her, but home, Clara knew, wasn't made from wood and stone. It was made from the kind of silence that didn't haunt you at night. She sat at the table while Elias poured her tea. It's not proper to ask too much, he said, eyes lowered. but I reckon if we're to be man and wife, I ought to know. Are you running from something? Her heart skipped. Clara raised the mug slowly. Aren't we all? Elias gave a short nod. No more questions. But in her carpet bag, beneath layers of folded clothes, a corner of a letter peeked out. She'd meant to burn it. A letter with her real name written at the top, Miss Clara Whitmore. And as the fire popped in the hearth, a sudden gust from the chimney sent a flurry of ash flying through the room, knocking her bag from the bench. The letter slid out, right toward the flames. Clara lunged too late. The edges curled, blackened, caught fire, until only a small scrap remained, just enough to make out the name Whitmore before it turned. To smoke. She sat back, heart hammering. Elias watched her from the kitchen, eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but he said nothing. Outside, snow fell heavier, and in the town Clara had just left behind. A man in black asked the station master a question. Where'd the girl go? The one with auburn hair and guilt in her step? The station master scratched his head. Said she was heading out to Turner's place. The man grinned. Not kindly. Good. Let's pay Turner a visit. Clara spent her first night at the Turner homestead wide awake. Elias had been kind. He gave her the bed, took the sofa, and didn't ask for anything more than her presence. But kindness, she had learned, didn't always mean safety. Sometimes, it was just the calm before the storm. The cabin creaked with every wind gust. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote howled, long and low as if warning her, "You're not safe yet." By morning, Elias was already outside splitting firewood, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the bitter cold. Clara watched him from the window. His movements were steady, unbothered, the rhythm of a man who carried his past quietly, or had buried it deep. She made coffee, hands trembling just enough to spill a few drops on the table. Couldn't sleep? Elias asked when he came back inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. Clara shook her head. He didn't press. But later, as they sat across from each other eating boiled oats, Elias told her a story. Not about himself, but about a stranger. Few winters back, a man rode into town asking questions. Said he was looking for a woman who ran off with secrets that weren't hers. Folks said he was charming, polite even, but he had dead eyes. Turns out he wasn't no bounty hunter. He was her past. Clara's spoon froze midair. She tried to lie, tried to say she didn't know him, but he had a way of talking that made you feel like your soul was under his boot. That night, her cabin burned. Folks said she lit the fire herself, but no one ever found her body. Elias leaned back, took a sip of coffee. Funny thing, that man never left. Still lives up in the ridge. Got a grave behind his house with her name on it, just no body in it. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Clara cleared her throat. What happened to him? Elias shrugged. Still rides into town sometimes. Ain't right in the head. Talks to that grave like she's listening. Something about the story chilled Clara deeper than the winter wind. Not just the tale, but the way Elias told it, like he was measuring her heartbeat as he spoke. Did he suspect? No, he couldn't. Still, Clara excused herself and stepped outside. The sky was a pale gray. Snow clung to every tree like a secret. She walked toward the barn, needing to breathe, to think, to forget that her hands were trembling again. Inside the barn, she ran her fingers over the wooden beams, the hay bales, the saddle hanging on. The wall. She needed to disappear again. Maybe not yet, but soon. Then, something shifted in the hayloft above. She froze. A boot scraped wood. Someone was up there. Her mouth went dry. Slowly, she reached for the pitchfork leaning by the door. But just then, Elias's voice called from outside. You all right, Clara? He'd jumped. The sound above stilled. Clara stepped out, nodding quickly. Yes, just getting fresh air. But as she walked back toward the cabin, she didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen the barn loft curtain twitch. and the black-gloved hand lower itself silently back into the hay. 3 days passed in quiet routine. Elias showed Clara the layout of the town: general store, sheriff's office, the church that hadn't seen a wedding in years. The townsfolk were curious but not rude. They looked at Clara the way prairie dogs watch a hawk, wary, unsure whether to trust the calm. Clara played the part well. She smiled politely, offered to help at the store, even taught a little girl how to hem a sleeve. She was building a new name, brick by careful brick. But on the 4th day, he arrived. The stranger rode in at noon on a black horse with white eyes. His duster coat was coated in road dust, his boots cracked with miles. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside like he owned the floorboards. "Elsie," the storekeeper froze mid-shelving flour bags. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice caught between suspicion and politeness. The man didn't speak at first. He set something on the counter. It was a silver locket, old, worn, tarnished, but the initials carved on it, C.E., still shimmered beneath the dust. Elsie blinked. "That's real pretty. Where'd you get it?" The man finally spoke, voice low and rough like gravel dragged across wood. "Belonged to a woman I used to know. Said she was dead, but I hear whispers she ain't." Elsie hesitated. "What's her name?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Clara." Behind the store wall, Clara's hand paused as she reached for a spool of thread. She couldn't see him, but she felt it. A cold ripple ran down her spine. She clutched the shelf's edge to keep from falling. The stranger continued, voice now a whisper. "You see, the thing about the dead, they don't sew dresses in dusty towns. They don't smile like they never broke a man's heart, and they sure as hell don't carry secrets in their eyes." Elsie didn't reply. "Tell her," the man said finally, "that someone's looking. Someone who remembers more than she prayed he would." He tipped his hat and walked out. Outside, Elias stood across the street, eyes narrowed as he watched the man ride away. Not fast, not slow, just certain. Inside, Clara still hadn't moved. She stared at the wall, heart pounding like a war drum. She'd buried that locket on a stormy night 2 years ago, under a tree she'd hoped would never be found. So how in God's name did he have it? That night, Elias asked her if she was all right. She smiled, lied, but sleep didn't come. Outside the window, the wind carried a voice only she could hear. "You can run, Clara, but secrets ride faster than horses." The next morning, Clara opened the front door to fetch water from the porch. And there it was, a small bundle wrapped in burlap. At first glance, it looked like a misplaced package, maybe left by Elias before heading out to the fields. But when Clara bent down and pulled back the cloth, her blood turned to ice. The locket, her locket. The same one that had vanished 2 years ago when flames devoured the farmhouse near Sutter's Mill. She'd thrown it into the blaze herself, watched it melt in the fire. Or so she thought. Now it sat before her, pristine, untouched by fire, carried back by hands she once prayed had perished. She unfolded the second cloth beneath it. It wasn't paper. It was a torn scrap of her old apron, one she hadn't worn since the night she escaped. On it, smudged in charcoal, were 6 words. "You left me in fire. Now I'll watch you freeze." Her hands trembled as she clutched the locket. Inside, the portrait was gone. Instead, a small nail had been driven through the center, leaving a rusted hole where once love had lived. She slammed the door shut, heart racing. What was he doing here? Why now? Had he come for vengeance? For closure? Or worse, to expose everything? She didn't tell Elias, not that morning, not even that evening, when he returned covered in dust and smiles, telling her about how the corn would need early harvest. This year, he looked so happy, so safe. She couldn't destroy that, but her sleep that night was filled with smoke. The sound of a barn crackling, a scream, a broken promise, and him, his face dark with soot, eyes burning brighter than the flames, shouting her name as the roof collapsed. "Clara!" She awoke with a gasp, soaked in sweat. Outside the window, the wind howled low like a warning. At sunrise, she went behind the house to bury the locket again, this time deeper, wrapped in thick cloth, tied with twine, beneath the old sycamore, where no one ever went. But as she turned to leave, something made her freeze. Boot prints, fresh, deep, leading from the tree, right up to the back door. She hadn't seen them before. They hadn't been there before. And worst of all, they didn't belong to Elias. By noon, whispers had begun swirling around town. It started at the post office where old Mr. Whitcomb swore someone had slipped a package through the slot before sunup, though he never saw a soul. Wrapped in brown paper and tied with black thread, it was left for the sheriff. When Sheriff Alden opened it, what he found made him go pale. Inside was a burned photograph, its edges curled, center intact. Two figures stood arm in arm, smiling in the picture, a younger Clara and him. The man, from her past, scrawled in shaky ink across the bottom, was just one word: mine. Alden couldn't make sense of it, but he knew trouble when he saw it. He folded the photo, locked it in his desk, and rode out to the church where Reverend Cole was leading afternoon prayers. Meanwhile, Clara was kneeling at the altar. Her eyes were closed, her lips whispering a desperate prayer. Not for forgiveness, not even for safety, but for time. A little more time. Time before Elias found out what she had done, who she had once belonged to. The Reverend approached gently. "Child, is everything all right?" Clara forced a smile. "Just needed some peace, Reverend, that's all." He didn't press, but his eyes lingered, as if he sensed the storm gathering behind her ribs. Outside the chapel, a little girl named Maddie tugged at Clara's skirt. "Ma'am, there was a man asking about you," she said innocently. "Said you had a fire in your eyes, like someone who'd burned down love itself." Clara's knees went weak. She clutched the pew and looked at the Reverend. Did you see him?" He shook his head slowly. No strangers came through the front, but someone had come, not through the doors, through her shadows. By the time she got back to the ranch, Elias was in the barn, hammering new nails into the chicken coop. He greeted her with a kiss to the cheek, his hands calloused and warm. "Storm's blowing in from the north," he said, smiling. "Could use your soup tonight." She nodded. "I'll make extra." But inside she was crumbling. As the pot simmered, she stared out the window. The sycamore swayed, and under its branches, a black feather, just one, tied to a thin strand of red ribbon. The same kind she once wore in her hair when she belonged to him. He wasn't just near, he was watching, and he wanted her to know it. That night, the wind howled like a wounded beast across the plains. Clara didn't sleep. She just lay beside Elias, listening to the creak of the shutters, the soft whistle through the floorboards, and her heart pounding like thunder in her ears. She knew he was here. Not just in town, near, watching, waiting. At sunrise, Clara wrapped herself in her shawl and rode out early, pretending she needed herbs from the riverbank. But the truth was, she had to see it for herself. The sycamore tree by the bend. The place she once carved her initials with a blade she stole from him, back when she thought it was love. Back before the bruises. When she reached it, her hands trembled. She dismounted slowly, boots crunching on frost-bitten grass. And there it was, her old name, etched deep into the bark. Rosalie. A name she'd buried with blood and fire, just below it. A fresh carving. Mine. Still. Her breath caught. She staggered back, scanning the trees. The silence was thick, unnerving. That's when she saw the second sign, a small silver locket, hanging from a branch with a red ribbon. She didn't want to touch it, but her fingers moved on their own. Inside the locket was a piece of paper, folded and stained. She unfolded it. It was her wedding photo. From back then. Before Elias. Before the ranch. Before Montana. There she was, younger, eyes dull, lips forced into a smile, and him, standing beside her, in black. A cruel grin carved across his face. She dropped the locket like it burned. Her horse stirred, uneasy. Clara looked up. A shadow moved, just beyond the ridge. A silhouette on a horse, tall and still, watching her. Her blood turned to ice. She didn't. Wait. She mounted and galloped back to town, heart hammering against her ribs. But no matter how far she rode, that feeling chased her, like the past had grown hooves and teeth and was now hunting. Back at the ranch, Elias noticed the fear in her eyes. He touched her shoulder. "You all right?" She forced a smile. "Just tired, that's all." But Elias was no fool. That night, as Clara sat silent by the fire, Elias stood out on the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the dark horizon. And in the distance, just at the tree line, a figure on a black horse, then gone. Elias couldn't shake the feeling. Clara's hands were trembling at supper. She dropped her fork twice, said nothing when he offered her coffee. Her smile had vanished, like it had been stolen by the wind itself. When she finally went upstairs to rest, Elias stayed behind. Not to read, not to smoke, to think. Something was wrong, and he wasn't the kind of man to let darkness creep in without staring it down first. By sunrise, Elias was out riding. Clara hadn't noticed it, but her boots had left traces of mud, and Elias followed the path they made, past the hills, toward the sycamore bend. He saw the tree. He saw the locket, still swinging in the breeze. He saw her old name. Rosalie. But what made his blood run cold was the photo, soaked now from dew, but still legible. A younger Clara. And beside her, a man whose eyes seemed carved from hellfire. Elias whispered, "Who are you, really?" He was halfway back to the ranch when he spotted something odd off the path. The stone base of what looked like a burned chapel. He didn't remember any church being built there in recent years. Curiosity pulled him closer. Charred beams lay, buried beneath the weeds. Ashes still clung to the stones. And at the center, half sunk in soot, was a rusted cross. Elias dismounted and ran his hand across the stones. That's when he saw it. A name carved into the altar slab. Rosalie Cantor, forever bound. His jaw clenched. He turned and spotted fresh hoofprints, not his, not Clara's. Another rider, heavy, deliberate, watching. He mounted quickly, heart thudding. As he rode back toward town, he kept one hand on his holster. Whoever this man was. He knew Clara's old name. He knew where she'd been. And worse, he was leaving signs, deliberate ones, as if playing a game, one where Elias had just stepped into a trap he didn't yet understand. Back at the ranch, Clara stood at the window. She hadn't slept. She saw Elias riding hard down the dirt road, face set like stone, and in that moment, she knew. The secret was cracking open. The past she buried 6 states ago was clawing its way back into the present, and the man riding on the black horse? He wasn't just here for memories. He was here to finish what he started. Elias was back at the ranch by dusk. His eyes were fierce, his jaw tight. When he entered, he didn't say a word. He just grabbed her wrist, leading Clara up the stairs without a second thought. Clara felt the familiar rush of panic rise in her chest. This wasn't a confrontation she was ready for. She couldn't let him in. She couldn't let him see. "You'll want to sit down," Elias said, pushing open the door to their room. She stood frozen in the doorway, her breath caught. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, like something ancient and suffocating was about to spill out. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "What aren't you telling me?" Her heart raced. "What do you mean?" She tried to pull her wrist free, but Elias held on tight. His gaze softened for a moment, but the storm in his eyes was unmistakable. "I saw it. The name. Rosalie. I saw the locket. The photo. You're hiding something from me." Clara turned away, pacing across the floor, her mind swirling with memories she'd spent years trying to bury. She'd convinced herself she could outrun the darkness, but now it was right here, inside her walls, with him. "I don't want to talk about this," she said, voice trembling. Her shoulders hunched in defeat, every inch of her body wanting to retreat. "It's over. It's in the past." But Elias stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "You're not that woman anymore, Clara. You don't have to keep running from what happened. I'm here. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Clara's eyes welled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, swallowing her fear. He wasn't going to stop. He never would. Not when there was something this big looming between them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I can't tell you." Elias's heart clenched. He could feel her fear, and it was worse than any storm he had faced. But he wasn't going to let it consume them, not after everything they'd been through. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara." His words were quiet but heavy, like a promise etched into stone. "Not unless you tell me the truth." Clara turned her back to him, feeling a cold, sickening weight on her chest. "There's nothing you can do about it," she said, voice shaking. "He's coming, and he'll take everything. He always does." Elias reached out and turned her around. His eyes bore into hers. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before she could answer, the sound of galloping hooves echoed from outside, loud and clear. Elias didn't wait. He pulled her toward the window, his grip firm. Together, they peered into the distance. Through the growing dark, the shape of a man on horseback appeared, cloaked in black, riding steadily toward them. A figure Clara knew all too well, the man on the black horse. Her past had finally arrived. The man on the black horse didn't slow down. His figure was unmistakable, his face shrouded in shadows, yet the chilling familiarity of his presence sent a wave of dread through Clara. Elias stood beside her, gripping the window frame tightly, his eyes narrowing. The man's silhouette became clearer with each passing second, and Clara's heart began to race. "No," she whispered. "Not him. Not now." Elias turned toward her, confusion and concern crossing his face. "Who is it, Clara?" Clara took a deep breath, her voice cracking with fear. "That man. He's the reason I left. The reason I changed my life." She turned toward Elias, her eyes filled with sorrow and regret. "He's the one who ruined everything." Elias's gaze darkened, but he said nothing. He could see the depth of her pain, but he had no idea what kind of storm was about to break. The man on the horse halted at the end of their driveway, his dark eyes scanning the house. He wasn't here for a friendly visit. Clara closed her eyes. For a moment, collecting herself. "His name is Thomas Blackwood. He was my past. The man I tried to forget." Elias's grip tightened around her waist as he gently pulled her closer. "What does he want?" Clara didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the door, walking past Elias with slow, measured steps. She knew what was coming. She had known this day would come eventually. Elias followed her, his footsteps heavy as they both approached the front door. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. Clara's pulse raced as she pulled open the door. Standing before them was Thomas Blackwood, dressed in a long black coat, his face weathered and hardened by time. His eyes locked onto Clara's, and for a moment the world stood still. "You're not welcome here, Thomas," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper, but strong enough to carry the weight of everything she had been holding back for years. Thomas's lips twisted into a grim smile. "I didn't come here to be welcome, Clara," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I came for what's mine." Elias stepped forward, his stance protective, though the tension between them was palpable. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You need to leave." Thomas didn't seem fazed by Elias's presence. His gaze shifted between Clara and Elias, then back to Clara. "She's mine," he repeated, the words dripping with a sense of ownership that made Clara's blood run cold. Clara's knees felt weak, but she refused to let them see her falter. She stood tall, her voice now steady. "I'm not yours anymore. I belong to this life now. I made my choice." Thomas's face darkened. "You can't outrun your past, Clara. It'll always come for you, and it's coming for you now." Elias placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. He didn't understand everything, but he knew that the man in front of him was dangerous, and Clara was in no condition to face him alone. Clara's heart raced, but she stood firm. "You don't have any power over me anymore. Whatever you think you can take from me, it's already gone." For a moment, Thomas said nothing. Then, with a look that promised vengeance, he turned his horse and rode off into the night. But Clara knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Clara sat by the fire that night, staring into the dancing flames as if they held the answers she couldn't say out loud. The warmth did nothing to stop the chill running through her bones. Thomas's voice, that threat, in his eyes, it echoed louder now than it had years ago when she fled. Elias stood silently at the window, rifle resting by his side, his jaw set firm. The man who had barely known Clara 2 months ago was now ready to protect her with his life. "You're not telling me everything," Elias finally said, not looking away from the darkness outside. Clara didn't respond at first. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her apron, her breath shallow. "I used to be someone else," she said at last. "Before Clara, before Dakota Springs, before the mail order ads and this peace." Her voice trembled, then hardened. "My name was Lily March, and Thomas Blackwood was my husband." Elias turned slowly, the flicker of shock barely registering in his composed face. He said nothing. "We were married young. He was charming at first," she continued. "But behind closed doors, he was a cruel man. He owned people, not loved them. When I lost our baby, he blamed me. Said I was cursed. After that, he stopped pretending to care. The bruises came. Then the threats." She looked up at Elias, her eyes shimmering with pain. "One night I ran. Took nothing. Didn't even stop to bury the past. I just disappeared. Changed my name. Found a town where no one asked questions." Elias walked toward her and knelt by the fire. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. But if that man lays a hand on you again, he'll answer to me." Clara's lip quivered. "I'm not afraid of death, Elias. I'm afraid of losing this life, you, the peace I found here. I've waited too long for something good." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, slow, deliberate. Both froze. Elias rose, his hand on the rifle as Clara clutched her chest. "Stay back," he whispered. He opened the door just a crack, but it wasn't Thomas. A small boy stood outside in the cold, no older than 8, his cheeks red from the wind. In his hand, he held a folded piece of paper. "You, Clara?" he asked in a shaky voice. Clara stepped forward. "Yes." The boy handed her the note, then turned and ran without another word. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The paper read, "Meet me at the creek at first light. Come alone, or everyone finds out who you really are." Their hand dropped to her side. Her secret wasn't just out, it was being weaponized. Elias looked at her. "You're not going alone." Clara met his gaze. "If I don't, he'll destroy everything." The sun hadn't risen yet. Just a pale silver glow on the edge of the horizon, cold and watchful. Clara stood at the edge of the creek, mist curling around her boots like ghost fingers, her shawl wrapped tight against the biting morning air. The trees around her whispered like they remembered things they weren't supposed to speak of. In her hand, she held the pistol Elias had slipped into her coat when he thought she wouldn't notice. But she had. And she hadn't put it back. She wasn't here to die. She was here to end something. A twig snapped. Clara didn't flinch. Out of the shadows stepped Thomas Blackwood, older now but no less dangerous. His dark coat brushed the ground, his wide-brimmed hat hiding the cruel smile she knew too well. A scar now ran down the left side of his face, making him look like the devil she remembered. "You came," he drawled, voice like poisoned honey. "I'm not here for games, Thomas," she said firmly. "What do you want?" He chuckled. "What I always wanted. You. Or at the very least, your silence. You think I don't know what you told that little town? That you made me into some monster?" "You are a monster," Clara snapped. "I have the bruises to prove it." He stepped closer. "Oh, I don't care what you remember, but others might. Your new name. That pretty rancher boy. I wonder how he'll feel when he knows he married another man's wife, a woman wanted in 3 counties for desertion." Clara's blood ran cold. "You'd ruin everything just to keep control?" "I own you, Lily," he hissed, using her old name like a blade. "You're mine until I say otherwise." She stared at him, and then she smiled. "No," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Behind her, boots crunched softly on frost-hardened grass. Elias stepped into view, rifle in hand, his expression unreadable. Thomas's smile vanished. "You brought him?" "I didn't have to," Clara said. "He followed me, because that's what people do when they love you." Thomas drew his revolver. Elias didn't blink. "Don't!" In a blur, Clara raised her pistol. Her hands shook, not with fear, but fury. "Don't make me do this," she said, voice cracking. "Walk away, Thomas. Let me go." He laughed. "You don't have it in you." Then his finger twitched toward the trigger. A single shot rang. Out. Then silence. Thomas collapsed into the creek mud, blood blooming beneath him like a final lie. Clara stood frozen, breath held, the gun still smoking in her hand. But it wasn't her who fired. Elias lowered his rifle slowly. "You shouldn't have come back, Blackwood." Clara turned to him, her heart breaking and healing all at once. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I know," Elias said softly. "But you're free now. Truly." She looked down at Thomas's body. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running. The echo of the gunshot rolled across Dakota Springs like thunder cracking through a stormless sky. Within minutes, townsfolk began to gather near the creek, curious whispers turning into cautious steps. Sheriff Merton rode in fast, his horse kicking up frost as he pulled the reins hard beside the frozen earth where Thomas Blackwood lay still, face turned toward the morning sky. Clara stood over the body, her hands no longer shaking. Beside her, Elias kept his stance firm, rifle lowered but not forgotten. Merton's eyes shifted from the corpse to Clara. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" Clara stepped forward. Her voice was clear. "His name was Thomas Blackwood. He followed me here, threatened me, tried to draw on us. Elias shot him before he could pull the trigger." Merton looked between them, taking in the soot-stained barrel of Elias's rifle, the tension in Clara's jaw, the undeniable truth laid out before him. "He was your husband?" Merton asked, softer now. Clara nodded. "He was, but not anymore." The sheriff dismounted. "Anyone else see or hear anything?" A few townsfolk, including old Ned and Miss Tabby from the bakery, shook their heads from the edge of the clearing. Word had traveled fast, but eyes hadn't been fast enough. Merton sighed. "It's clear self-defense far as I can see, but you'll need to come to town, give a statement." Elias looked to Clara. She didn't flinch. "Of course. I won't. Run." Merton tipped his hat. "Didn't figure you would." As the sheriff turned to manage the scene, Clara glanced back at the creek. The same water that once washed away her footprints when she fled now held the final trace of a man who haunted her. "I thought I'd feel lighter," she said quietly to Elias. "You don't?" he asked. "I feel like I can finally breathe, but it's not light. It's heavy with what it took to get here." Elias touched her hand. "You didn't choose this path, Clara. You survived it." They walked together to town as the rising sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the earth gold. By midday, the whole town knew. Miss Tabby offered fresh cornbread on Clara's porch. Ned stopped by to sharpen Elias's tools free of charge. Even the preacher, who once looked at Clara with narrowed eyes, tipped his hat with quiet respect. But it was the children at the schoolhouse who truly marked the shift. A young girl, no, more than 7, ran to Clara with a bundle of daisies. "These are for you," she said shyly. "My mama said you were real brave." Clara knelt, eyes misting. "Thank you, sweetheart." Later that evening, as Elias sat on the porch whittling a piece of pine, Clara stepped outside and joined him, the rocking chair groaning beneath her. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what?" Elias asked. "To stop hiding. From my name. From my past. From everything." He looked over. "Then we'll tell them. All of it. On your terms." Clara smiled. "Lily March died years ago. I buried her in the night when I ran. But Clara Blake, she was born the moment I chose to stay." Elias reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. And for the first time since she arrived in Dakota Springs, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like a woman who had earned her place, scars, secrets, and all. By the 3rd day after Thomas's death, Dakota Springs felt warmer, not just from the early spring sun, but from the way folks had started treating Clara. She was no longer a stranger, no longer that mail-order bride. She was Clara Blake, and her name, finally, felt like hers to carry. Elias had barely left her side since that morning by the creek. Where once he stood at a distance, unsure of the shadows behind her eyes, now he looked at her with an understanding born from fire. They were sitting on the porch sharing coffee when a rider approached, fast and alone. He was dressed in gray, dust-covered clothes, and Clara's stomach clenched. Elias stood, hand near his hip. "You know him?" Clara squinted as the man dismounted and tied his horse. "No, but he carries something," she whispered. The stranger pulled off his hat and nodded politely. "Ma'am, sir, I'm looking for Clara March." Clara froze. "That name don't exist no more," Elias replied firmly. The man sighed. "I figured she might say that. Name's Jonathan Price. I'm a lawyer from back east. Came all this way 'cause I got something that belongs to her." Clara slowly stepped down from the porch. What could possibly belong to Lily March? He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Thomas Blackwood's estate," he said. "Turns out your late husband finally croaked, died in the West Dakota Territory 2 weeks ago. Got shot by a rancher's boy over a debt. That means you, ma'am, are his widow, legally, which means the Blackwood property, every last bloody acre, now belongs to you." Clara nearly laughed. "That can't be. Thomas was here 3 days ago. She stopped, her breath catching. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am?" She turned to Elias, who stood pale as the mountain. "Frost. The man at the creek, that wasn't Thomas Blackwood." The silence between them thickened. It hadn't been him. So who had threatened her? Jonathan, unaware of the revelation crashing through Clara's mind, continued. "There's more. He left a letter. Said if you ever turned up, I was to deliver. Only if you were still alive." He handed it to her. The envelope was yellowed, the handwriting unmistakably Thomas's. Clara turned it over, heart thudding. She opened it slowly. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means I'm dead. And somehow, you've survived all I threw at you. I don't ask for forgiveness. I never deserved you. but I left everything to you because deep down, I knew you'd do better with it than I ever did. Maybe that's my last chance at making something right. Don't waste it." Clara's knees went weak, and Elias caught her before she collapsed. Later. That night, as the stars rose over Dakota Springs, Clara sat at the same porch where she once wondered if she'd ever outrun her past. Now, it had handed her the keys to its legacy. "Elias," she whispered, "what if I don't want it? The land, the money, the name." He looked out into the night. "Then we build our own, with your name, on your terms." She took his hand and pressed the letter into the fire. Sometimes the only way to close a door is to burn it. Spring bloomed in Dakota Springs like it never had before. Wildflowers pushed through dry soil, as if the land itself knew that something dark had passed, and something beautiful was being born. Clara stood atop the ridge, the old blackwood letter now long turned to ash. Below her stretched the horizon of land Thomas had once owned, tainted by pain, now hers to reshape. But she hadn't come alone. Elias rode up beside her, his horse kicking up soft dust. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Clara turned to him. "You think I should sell it?" He shrugged. "It's yours to do right by." "That's what matters." She took a breath. "I don't want blood money, but I want to turn it into something that can't hurt anyone anymore." They rode down to the old Blackwood property the next morning. The place was near ruins, barns, collapsed, fences broken, the main house still standing but hollow. It was a monument to power without love. By the week's end, Clara had made up her mind. She gathered the townsfolk, the same people who had once whispered behind her back, and stood before them on the church steps. "I was born Lily March," she began, voice clear. "I married a monster, ran for my life, and became Clara Blake. This town gave me a second chance, and now I want to give that chance to others." She held up a deed. "This land is now the future site of a refuge, for women like me, for widows, for orphans, for anyone who needs shelter from a storm." Gasps echoed. Tears welled. Elias watched her from the back, pride in every line of his face. Weeks passed. Foundations were laid. Walls were built. Children's laughter began to echo where only ghosts once lived. The old Blackwood land wasn't a scar anymore. It was a seed. And one summer afternoon, under a big cottonwood tree near the new chapel, Elias knelt, no big speech, no crowd, just one question. "Can I walk beside you, Clara Blake? Not as a shadow, but as your partner, your home." Clara smiled, not the smile of a woman escaping, but of one returning to herself. "Yes, Elias. Let's build something together." That night, a small ceremony was held by lantern light. The whole town came. No lace, no fancy music, just the wind, the stars, and two hearts healed by truth and time. The woman who'd once escaped into the night had become a beacon in a daylight. Her past hadn't defined her. Her choice had. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Luminous Tales, because every soul has a story, and every story deserves to shine.